So now we have our first trigger, which is a chat, and every time it receives a message, it will activate the sequence of nodes that are part of our workflow. My goal for this first project is to create a very simple workflow that will read the message received by our chat and check whether the message includes the word hello. If it does, it will say good morning, and if it doesn't, it will say aren't you going to greet me? Basically, it's a workflow that behaves according to the information that it receives. So let's start by connecting more nodes to our workflow to implement that logic. Since we already have this chat from which the message will enter, now we need to connect it to a new node that will decide which path to take depending on the content of the message. This node that we're going to add should be able to evaluate a condition, which in your case will be does this message contains the word hello or not? And based on that, it will make a decision. To connect this initial node to the second node I want to add, you can do it in different ways, of course, as always, but the most common one is to click this plus button that you have next to the node or the trigger, and this opens again this panel on the right where now we can choose the next node from a list of available options grouped into different categories that you can see all here. Although you could browse category by category until you find what you're looking for, in practice, since there are thousands and thousands of possible nodes, the most common way is to search for them using the search bar on the top. In this case, I am going to search for a node called if. So I write AF, and this stands for conditional if, the if that we use when we say if something happens, do this, if it doesn't, do something else. As you can see, there are several options that include the word if. The first one is the one that we want, which says route items to different branches, true or false. So this if node will check if a condition is true or false and routes the workflow accordingly. So we click on if, and as you can see, this large window appears, which is used to configure the behavior of this or every node that you open. And this window is very important because every node will have something very similar, and this is where we will set parameters so that the node behaves exactly the way we need. Of course, we will configure this, but for now I will close this window by clicking outside just to show you what the if node looks like in our workflow. Notice that this is a node that receives information from the chat trigger through this connector line linking them. But unlike other nodes, the if node doesn't have just one output, it has two. One labeled true for when the condition being evaluated is true, and one labeled false for when the condition, of course, is false. This means that we will connect more nodes to this if node depending on what we want to happen if the condition is met or not. We said that what we want is to check if the chat message contains hello. So that will be the condition that we are going to ask this node to evaluate. If that condition is true, the flow will continue through this top connector, and if it's false, meaning that the message doesn't include hello, it will continue through this false connector. Of course, you can also move these nodes wherever you want in the workflow, and if you hold the space bar to move the whole flow, you can center everything and organize it to your liking. Just like we did with the chat node, we can also rename this if node. We can do it again through this rename option. I will do it. I will rename this check if message says hello, and that's it. And now that we renamed it, you can see that our flow is very clear. When chat message received, check if message says hello. This is what our workflow should do right now. You don't need actually to change the names. They don't affect the functionality, but for clarity's sake, it's a good idea to give your nodes names that explain what each one does. Now that you have seen what this node looks like visually, let's open but this configuration window again by double clicking on it, and let me show you what we have here. As you will see, when we work with different types of nodes, each one will have a particular configuration window with slightly different structures or parameters, but in general, they will follow this same layout, which is an input section on the left, a parameters and settings section in the center, and an output section on the right. What does this mean? It means that the data comes into this node from the input side, and then after it's processed by the settings and parameters of the node, it outputs to the next node all the data for it to use it. And this is really important because workflows are essentially flows of information that move from one node to another. The trigger at the beginning sends information to the next node. That means that the trigger has an output. You can see it if I open here. The trigger doesn't have an input layout, but it has this output window with the information that will send to the next node, and we can go to the next node right by here. Here we are. Here we will have the information that the trigger is sending to us, or the previous node in other cases, and it will process it and send it to the next node if there is one via this output part of the window. Now that we understand what an input, a configuration, and an output means, in the next lesson we're going to learn how to configure these nodes' properties so that our if node behaves exactly as we want it to.